The U.S. Department of Defense and America's press corps, there's ensued dozens of Pentagon correspondents walking away from their access credentials in a packed office, exiting the building rather than to bow to what they say, attempts to muzzle their reporting. So earlier on today, the Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth, introduced sweeping new rules for Pentagon press access, rules that would give the department the power to revoke credentials from reporters who publish information not authorized by his office. In response, nearly all major media organizations refused to sign on. So we speak about the situation now to Craig Unger, an American journalist and writer. We're also joined by Economist Lawyer James Henry from Yale in the US. A very good evening to you both, and thank you so much for speaking to us.
You're very welcome, and thanks for the invitation, and regards to everyone in South Africa.
So, from the corridors of the Pentagon to the pages of the First Amendment, Craig, let me just start with you. I mean, you have had experience covering power and accountability in the United States. What do you think about this confrontation between the Pentagon and the press? What does it reveal about the state of press freedom in the United States today?
Well, it's almost comical to sign that statement. You're basically signing up to be a propagandist. And we have a term of art here about journalism, access journalism. And one of the problems with getting that access is you end up carrying water for the people about whom you're supposed to be writing critically. And this shows that there's to be absolutely no criticism of the Trump administration if you sign this. And it's just it's insanely blatant, and my hope is that it will backfire.
And let me then just hear from you then. Let me just hear from you then, James, just in terms of, from a legal standpoint, is there language that would naturally contradict what the U.S. Defense Secretary is saying about what their intentions are, that is to protect the military? Is it overtly restrictive, repressive?
Well, there's no evidence that there's any national security threat at all that's being dealt with by this measure. It's clearly unconstitutional. We have a Second Amendment in the United States, the quite clearly provides for press freedom and freedom of speech as well. But I think what's really interesting, this is a part of a pattern of actions by the Trump administration in general. They've gone after major law firms, they've gone after major universities, and the press is the one area that they've had the most resistance from consistently. Most of the major law firms have caved. We've seen the corporate America virtually silent when it comes to opposing. It reminds me of Germany in March of 1933. But in the case of the press, in this case, we had a unified rejection of the proposal by the Pentagon to require this kind of conditioning. And the kind of interference with press freedom is really unprecedented for the United States, something that Putin would do, but it's totally antagonistic to American values.
And Craig, I'm curious about that, just to follow on from what James is saying. He says it's unprecedented. What has changed? Because I think you've also just written about that intersection of government intelligence and the press, and you've written about how the information control became a political weapon in the post 9/11 era. So what we're seeing now, is that a continuation of that trend?
Yes, but it's much, much worse. One of the interesting things is that even Fox News, which is owned by Rupert Murdoch and has been slavishly uncritical and favorable about the Trump administration, even they refuse to sign this. So this makes it, it really is no exaggeration to say you would have to be, if you sign that, you're openly a propagandist for Donald Trump. And it allows no possibility of critical journalism.
And James, from your point of view, following on from what Craig has said, you've studied the economics of secrecy and institutional capture. What's your read on what has led to this point? I mean, I think President Donald Trump has always been clear about his intentions and how far right he's become over the years. But what is the intentions here? Because if we're talking about unauthorized coverage, and yet that's juxtaposed with the First Amendment, where is the United States going with what it's been over the years lauded for as one of the biggest, if not the best, democracy in the world?
Well, this is a direct result on assault on all of our political traditions, and it's no question that Trump is really going for a kind of blatant attack on his perceived opponents. We've seen him martialize law enforcement around the country. He's deploying troops. He's had these egregious cases against universities that have sponsored protests he doesn't like. And he's denigrating the rights of Americans to resist, his policies. And I think on Saturday we're going to have a major protest nationwide, the No Kings protest, and that's the kind of tradition that we need to remind ourselves of. The United States traditionally opposed monarchs, and they opposed absolute government. And we've been really at our best a big proponent of expanding civil liberties and free speech and rights of the press. So the press has an unusual status in the United States, and it's actually mentioned in the Second Amendment as freedom of the press, and that's not necessarily the same as just free speech. We recognize the importance of having an institutional opposition to whoever may hold power at the moment. And that's what Trump is really concerned about. I think it expresses really a kind of insecurity on his part. He needs to take these steps in order to deal with the fact that his economic policies are not succeeding, that there's increasing opposition on the ground in places like Oregon, and Michigan, and Chicago, and New York. So we're seeing the signs that his movement may be coming apart.
And Craig, I'll come to you in just a moment to understand the institutionalization of the media, the infrastructure, etc., and how it compares to the rest of the world. But just staying with you, James, on the economics of secrecy, but now I want to look at access and access as a currency. What we're seeing now is it evidence that access, that media has been too dependent on it, and that there's been a shift that has enslaved them?
Well, I think that if there is a good aspect of this policy, it is that it will, by cutting off the kind of conveyor belt that often exists between mainstream journalists and official institutions like the Pentagon and the intelligence agencies. This will force journalists to actually do some more hard work to get at what the real stories are that are going on, because they can't automatically rely on their instant sources within these agencies. They'll have to find new ways of covering the issue. The issue is that, the Defense Department has $1 trillion budget right now. It's probably the only beneficiary of the Trump agencies other than the Department of Homeland Security in terms of budgets. But there's certainly a lot of room for critical coverage of where all that money is going.
And money in the military sector, Craig, are something that wield huge influence and control. You've written in the past about intelligent networks and political elites, how they've learned to game the media by rewarding compliance and punishing independence. So what has brought America to this end of the line? And I want to talk about the structural weaknesses of the media in the United States when we talk about this.
Right. Well, I think the media has gotten weaker and weaker over the last 50 years. And when I started out in journalism, which was over 50 years ago, there were stories like Watergate, the Pentagon Papers, the My Lai massacre, that we remember 50 years later that changed the course of history. And one or two journalists could do a story, and suddenly the national conversation would change. But over the years, it's changed a lot, and part of it is technology. It's fragmented and atomized, and when I was in college, we had 3 channels, and then 10 years later, you had 600 channels, and then the internet, and now social media. And in each stage of that, the press has atomized more and more and more. When I started out, we had a country that shared the same factual reality, Republicans and Democrats. Now it's broken into thousands of different silos that don't speak to each other. So it's very hard to have one voice, and you do have this added force of access journalism that Trump knows how to play. I mean, he's played the press. I worked at New York Magazine 40 years ago, and Trump was a rising star in the world of real estate, and you could see that he knew how to manipulate reporters even then. And I'm hoping the winds will change very, very soon.
And just very quickly, Craig, then does it really indicate a need to re-engineer journalism, methods entirely, and how should it look like? And I'm also thinking about foreign media that have been based there, because it is about proximity to the networks of Washington press corps, who is able to give you an in. So that means that too changes for the foreign media that's based there.
Right. Well, one of the problems I think really does have to do with social media, which is completely unregulated in the United States. And you can see there is some regulation, at least in Europe. And to my mind, I get a lot of my news from the foreign media because, to be honest, I find it more trustworthy than the American press, a lot of which is compromised by their access. The New York Times wants to have access to the White House. Now, it's not going to sign this Pentagon paper that Pete Hegseth is putting out, but it's still often, they are very much aware that if they're not nice to Donald Trump, they won't have access. And he is cultivating that quite openly now. And it's hard to get around it. And for my mind, access is compromising. It's best to go ahead without it, and not rely on having that access all the time.
So, James, when we come to the legal and constitutional dimensions of this, you've spoken about constitutional safeguards, and particularly from the prism of public accountability. What does this then do? Is there a distinction of holding up legally or linguistic, the linguistic state of hand in what the Defense Department has done here?
Well, the first thing about enforcing a constitution is that you have to have an independent judiciary. And at the moment, our Supreme Court has basically become occupied territory from the standpoint of resisting these kinds of intrusions on traditional press freedom. So we have to answer the question, how do we actually attack and defend our freedoms? That's the first question here. Worldwide, I took a look at the rankings of the United States and other countries, and South Africa as well, in terms of press freedom. Just the latest press index says that South Africa is 27th in the world. The United States has dropped to 23, but that's still considerably higher than, let's say, India, 141, Russia, 178. So we've still got a lot of I think values to defend here, and it's a question of people having a wake-up call here, realizing that democracy and civil liberty have never been free. We've always had to defend them. And so one measure of the extent to which you are free is you basically have to declare a freedom and see if rights are taken away from you. And the extent to which you defend your rights is the extent to which you are really free. So this is a moment, a wake-up call for American lawyers, American journalists, and I think the American people in general. Do we really care enough about these freedoms to defend them?
So, Craig, we spoke about the fact that you rely on foreign media a lot of the time, and you've worked with your foreign colleagues in the past. So, how is this going to impact them if we're talking about institutional realignment? And I'm also curious about foreign policy. Is that going to have an impact? Is there going to be a shift, particularly when you look at the fact that foreign media also are reliant on proximity if they intend to report accurately, especially around defense. And it is also reflective on the US administration, which way it's going in a lot of its foreign policy endeavors.
Right. Well, with Trump in power, I think we've seen a paradigmatic change in world affairs. And to be honest, NATO and the entire Western alliance is now in doubt. NATO, has been very successful. Way to end World War II was to build up strong economic institutions, market economies in Europe, to build up strong democratic institutions and a strong military alliance. But now the United States is not a reliable partner in NATO. And I think everyone understands that. Trump will occasionally make noises that he supports Ukraine, but he's really not doing that. If you look at things like Russian oil exports, a lot of them go to India. And even though they're big tariffs on India, the oil is exempt from those taxes. So if Trump really wanted to crack down on Russia, which is a major conflict that we see from the West, we've not really come to Ukraine's aid nearly as much as we should have.
So does that mean we're going to see less and less transparency on those matters? And that was the initial intention, just to your mind.
Yeah.
Great.
Right now, I feel we get no transparency from the Trump administration. And my only hope is you're going to see we have the midterm elections coming up roughly a little more than a year from now. And right now Trump is quite unpopular. So one would think the Democrats could make a lot of could actually retake Congress. But Trump is doing everything he can to prevent that. They're gaming the elections by rearranging districts. A lot of what they're doing is openly racist. And we'll have to see how much America fights back then. What Trump will do to prevent the Democrat from winning. Will there be he call into the Insurrection Act? Right now, we have American troops in Portland, Oregon, in Los Angeles, in D.C., and coming to Chicago. These are all signals that perhaps martial law could take place before the Insurrection Act could be called out, and Trump would use that as a weapon to make sure the Democrats don't take the midterm elections.
And James, how do you foresee it playing out in congressional politics here? Because if this is being done under national interest, I want to understand, given your work in global financial transparency, do you see parallels between how information is hoarded in the defense sphere and how it's hidden in offshore finance? And this could be a powder keg for the Republicans.
Well, if Americans come to understand how the United States has become probably the largest financial secrecy haven, Trump has basically gutted all of the enforcement that we have against financial secrecy, against money laundering, Financial Corruption Practices Act has been decimated, and he's basically taken and legalized crypto as a vehicle for money laundering. So we're having an explosion of financial crime, and the United States' role as a haven for dirty money is exploding. Uh, Not the least of which are the members of the Trump family who are, making the rounds in the Middle East, rounding up investments in their crypto companies. So, this is another aspect of this. I think in understanding what Trump is up to, it's hard to ignore the level of basic criminality and self-enrichment that's going on here. So the United States has to defend its values on a number of different fronts. We've always been in the vanguard of progressive taxation. We've always been, for many years, in the vanguard of fighting international corruption and bribery and financial secrecy. And, those values are being chipped away. It's going to be a real struggle to recover our position. But, we've done it before, and I think we've beaten fascism before, helped to, and it can be done.
So, Craig, what will it take when liberal and conservative outlets, their audience, see that they have been locked out? Is there going to be some sort of unity that is built from a shared resistance of this latest move?
Well, I certainly hope so. The Republican Party really has been completely captured by the Trump and the MAGA people. And right now, they won't even swear in a duly elected congresswoman whose vote would be very, very important. So they're resorting to all these quasi-illegal measures to keep what power they have. And at a certain point, right now Trump's only been in office this term for it's about 9 months now, and we're just starting to really, really feel the ill effects. There are not as many jobs as there were. We're seeing inflation come back, and just the whole idea of American troops there to shoot at Americans in the streets on our land is not very popular, and I think I'm hoping it will backfire.
And James, should there be a meeting of minds between these disparate media outlets about how to improve on reporting, particularly from a transparency level? What funding models do you foresee? Non-profit consortia, for instance, for reader-owned media, how do you see them morphing from the situation into something that is more constructive for freedom, media freedom, press freedom, as you call it, for citizens in general, in terms of their right to access to information and credible information?
Well, as you said, we've seen a radical change in the economics of being a journalist, especially for investigative journalism. Since the 1980s, the number of reporters in the United States has dropped from about 88,000 in 1990 or so down to less than 25,000. And a lot of that reflects, the trends that Craig has mentioned on social media. It is a real challenge. We've explored nonprofit models of journalism, like ProPublica, having contributors, but we've also seen in that space a lot of the most important media being taken over by mega billionaires. Larry Ellison just acquired CNN and Paramount and a number of other properties. TikTok has been taken over by the right-wing billionaires. Elon Musk owns Twitter. So this growing, I think, sort of cartelization of the media is another whole issue that we really haven't discussed. These are all basic challenges. One thing I would say is that there's a growing international recognition that the United States needs support from abroad, not only from journalists, but also from citizens. And I think this is a struggle that I was familiar with when South Africa was going through its troubles in the 1980s. The world community kind of came together and decided to support the anti-apartheid forces. In the United States and in several other European countries, we have a similar need to have international support for the forces of democracy. And so it's not just about journalists, it's also about ordinary civil rights and civil liberty supporting groups. But the basic economic challenges that journalism faces are not unique to the United States. And I think what we're seeing here with the Pentagon is an extreme case. But we're going to have to struggle to find new ways of maintaining the critical role that journalists play in our constitutional order.
And Craig, just to end with you, what do you see 5 years from now in terms of the media ecosystem in the United States? And would that be dependent on a new leader being at play? I'm just thinking in terms of administrative overreach or executive control being lessened or increased, and what lessons should we journalists in developing countries learn from this?
Well, one thing is I think social media needs to be regulated, and it's completely unregulated right now. And as Jim said, I mean, the owners of it really are not interested in getting the right story out there. They're interested in clickbaits, and they are, they want to make, they're multi-billionaires and they want to make as much money as possible. And that's really not what journalism is about. But with the rise of technology, newspapers, print is no longer a viable, there's no viable economic model. That is, you need publicly funded things like ProPublica, or newspapers like the New York Times need to have gimmicks like lots of games and crossword puzzles and cooking, and that's really different from the news. There's nothing wrong with all that stuff, but I think we're approaching a moment in time where it's really an existential crisis for the United States. And if Trump is allowed to proceed unimpeded, then we are become an authoritarian state, if you want to call it fascism. Maybe that's the right term. At the same time, I think it's quite possible, and I certainly hope his movement starts to implode as people start to feel the pain of what he's been doing on the, when they're stocking, going to the grocery store and buying groceries, and they see soldiers on the streets snatching Americans who are here, or foreigners who are here legally, but snatching them off the streets. And we'll see. There's a big demonstration here on Saturday all over the United States. There should be millions of people out in the streets, and we really need that.
And we'll see how that plays out too. Thank you very much.
Can I say just one more thing?
Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to close on a more positive note, because I'm trying to tell my students who are trying to decide what to do with their lives that for all of the crises that we face in journalism, there is nothing more rewarding and more important socially critical function than to be a journalist, especially an investigative journalist. And especially in these times, this is a vital role to play on the front lines of defending democracy.
Well, hopefully we'll speak to you both in another 6 months and we'll hear what's changed, and a positive change, as you say, James. Thank you very much to you both. Craig Unger, an American journalist and writer, as well as Economist